In 2008, a young man from Minnesota went missing without a trace. The most intriguing part about this mystery is that he suddenly vanished while being on the phone with his parents. Brandon Swanson was 19. He was a young man from Marshall, a small rural town in Minnesota. After he graduated from high school, he went on to study wind turbines at a community college in a nearby town called Canby, which was another very small rural town about 45 minutes from his hometown, Marshall. At the end of the semester, Brandon attended a couple of parties in the town of Canby to celebrate the end of the school year with his friends. There was nothing out of the ordinary at these parties, just typical gatherings with friends from college. It was later reported that Brandon was observed consuming alcohol that night, but it was also noted that he did not seem visibly intoxicated or drunk before leaving the party sometime before midnight. Sometime after midnight, while Brandon was driving back home, he lost control of his car and drove it off the road into a ditch. Brandon was not injured, but his car was stuck in the ditch and he was unable to drive it home. He used his cell phone to call his parents to come pick him up, but he was unsure of his exact location, so he told them that he was somewhere on the highway between Canby and Marshall. Instead of waiting by the car, Brandon decided to walk along the highway in the direction towards the nearest town where he thought he could see lights coming from. This was a dark and lonely highway without any houses or businesses along the way. It was pretty dark. There were simply no visible landmarks to help pinpoint exactly what his pickup location would be so that he could relay that information to his parents. However, it wasn't too difficult either to describe the general vicinity or direction of where he was. There was no reason to suspect this would be a challenging task. His parents drove towards the highway while they stayed on the phone with him, hoping to eventually reach his location and just pick him up. Although they did not know his exact location, they expected to find him walking along the highway eventually. They expected that Brandon would eventually see their headlights and flag them over so his parents could just pick him up. However, they were not able to locate him once they reached the area of the highway where they expected him to be at. They were still on the phone with him and they continued talking, but they could not find him. They were actually connected for an additional 47 minutes while they continued to drive down the highway until, suddenly and abruptly, he exclaimed a few words and the call went silent. The call actually did not disconnect, but they could not hear from Brandon again. In fact, Brandon was never seen or heard from again. His parents tried calling again and again, but the phone was never answered again. His cell phone was never found either. His parents reported Brandon missing in the morning, but the initial response from police was dismissive at first, stating that it wasn't unusual for a college-age young man to stay out late after partying, especially during the end of the school year. Brandon's mother recalled that one of the officers was very dismissive and actually said to her that it was Brandon's right to be missing and that it just struck weird to her that there was no urgency to go look for him. Police eventually started a search into the last known location for Brandon, but they quickly found no trace of him. Authorities obtained Brandon's cell phone records, which revealed that he had been calling from the area of Taunton along State Highway 68. This was contradictory to the last known location given by Brandon himself. The search effort was moved based on the newly discovered information where deputies eventually found Brandon's car abandoned in a ditch off a dirt road along State Highway 68. Authorities confirmed that the car showed signs of minimal damage, but it was clear that it was stuck in the ditch and unable to be driven away. Due to the grassy gravel ground, authorities noted that there were no shoe tracks that may suggest if Brandon had walked away in a certain direction. The cell phone data helped narrow down the search area to a 5-mile radius from where the last call to his parents was made. The search efforts included flyover aerial teams, dock units, and ground searches. This is where the story takes a bit of an intriguing turn. A group of bloodhounds picked up a scent and followed it for 3 miles along field roads into an abandoned farm. The bloodhounds continued to follow the scent past the abandoned farm and eventually went along the Yellow Medicine River. Brandon's father recalled that he mentioned passing fences and hearing a river nearby. Authorities began search efforts concentrated around the riverbanks following the possibility that Brandon may have drowned, but they never found a body or any evidence pointing to it. Multiple search efforts continued to expand the search area for months, which eventually turned into years, covering over 120 square miles, but all with no results. At one point, a group of search dogs picked up a scent of human remains in an area that had not been searched before, and although investigators concentrated in that area, No remains were ever found. So what could have happened to Brandon? How did he just vanish without a trace? How come his body was never found, or any evidence like shredded clothes or his shoes or his keys, his wallet, his phone? Just nothing. People that saw him drinking that night said that he did not seem visibly intoxicated, and his dad said that he did not sound drunk or confused on the phone. So if Brandon had had a little bit to drink, it seems reasonable to think that the effects of alcohol would have decreased substantially by the time he uttered his last words on the phone, and alcohol may not have played a significant factor in his disappearance. But unfortunately, without any empirical evidence, maybe alcohol did play a role in his disappearance. Maybe that's why his car ended up in the ditch. Maybe that's why he didn't want to wait by his car. Maybe that's why he was confused about his location. Maybe that's why he wandered away from safety. But we'll never know for sure, I guess. Some of the most common theories speculated about this case include that perhaps he fell into an abandoned well. Other people suggest that maybe he fell into the river. And while most of the obvious answer is that he drowned, it's a very small river with barely any current that in many areas is not even deep enough to reach your waist. And sometimes, depending on the time of the year, the levels drop quite a lot. So his body should have turned up by now if he had fallen into the river. If he actually fell into the river, it's more likely that he was able to get out of the river, but then because he was wet and it was cold, he probably succumbed to the elements due to exposure and hypothermia. But this still doesn't explain why his body or his belongings were never found. All these scenarios would likely have left some kind of trace behind, and his body would have eventually been found. This is what the river looks like currently on satellite images. Not the kind of river where people drown easily and their bodies are never recovered. This is not the kind of river that could hide a secret forever. There's also the possibility of foul play, but there doesn't seem to be any circumstantial evidence pointing to it, and it seems even more unlikely, yet it cannot be ruled out. Another theory is that Brandon could have been hit by a driver that panicked and hit his body in order to avoid legal consequences. But this is unlikely because Brandon told his father on the phone that he was walking through fields and away from the road. Another theory is that Brandon could have been the victim of a bear attack. But this is largely dismissed, mostly because his keys, wallet, his phone, or his glasses would have been left behind in the case of an animal attack. There's also the theory that he may have wanted to disappear and he staged the whole thing. But again, there's just not enough circumstantial evidence to support this theory. One of the most complex theories speculated on the internet is that he probably suffered a freak accident. He fell into a body of water, climbed out, and succumbed to hypothermia or had a head injury that made him pass out on a farm field where his body was eventually ran over by large farm equipment, thus explaining why dog units picked up the scent of human remains but no body was ever found. The FBI listed the case of Brandon Swanson on their missing persons website. What do you think may have happened to Brandon, and why do you think there was no trace behind, no evidence, nothing pointing to what may have happened to him? And by the way, if you found any value in this video, whether it was just a few minutes of entertainment or some valuable information, you can return the value for value with a like, a comment, or better yet by subscribing. And if you're feeling extra generous, head over to our Patreon where you can find different ways to support the channel. Thank you for watching.